Welcome to my Just Jenny podcast. My guest today is Andrew McCarthy. He was on before. I think he was on my radio show. I guess during the pandemic, Andrew, I think was when, and I don't know if it was for your last book or you've been on a few times, I feel like. But the one that always sticks out for me is the one about the really creepy show where there was a kid that was kidnapped or not and came back pretending to be who she was, but she wasn't.
The family, yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. Maybe because your character was so creepy and it was upsetting that I just, every time I see you, that's just what I think of.
This creepy guy. Oh, good. Thanks. Good to see you.
It's wonderful. This book, though, I got it. Well, I also think of Mannequin, which isn't at all creepy. It's just lovely. You
The
and
opposite of creepy, yeah.
it's just the best. This book that you are here to talk about, Walking with Sam, about your walk with your son across Spain's Camino de Santiago, is so beautiful. And I mean, what an experience to have, huh?
Yeah, it was an amazing, thank you. Yeah, it was an amazing experience. It's the best thing, I like to say it's the best thing I've ever done twice.
Yeah, and according to your son, I don't want to ruin it for people who haven't read it yet. He has a ultimately, I think, a similar reaction.
Yeah, I mean, day two, he said, Dad, what's the point of this fucking walk? And forgive me. And the last day he said, Dad, that's the only 10 out of 10 thing I've ever done in my life. So yeah, he had quite a journey.
I was the part I wasn't going to say yet because I read the book. So I don't want it's when you read a book like the story is so well told, and I should say that you're a 3-time already New York Times bestselling author. You're not just the heartthrob from the 1990s. And you've done so many things through the years, from obviously acting in more projects, but writing and directing and living a full life. I never knew about the first walk you took years and years ago.
Yeah, I
Well,
walked across Spain. The Camino is an ancient pilgrimage route that people have been walking for centuries. And yeah, I did it back in the early 90s, and it was a real life changer for me. And so it was something I'd always wanted to do again. And when I was able to bamboozle my son into doing it with me, it was time to go.
yeah, I mean, the way that I grew up, if I had said to my parents that I wanted to do a 500-mile trek across Spain, it would have just never, it would have not have had, they would have had to send someone to take me. Like they would have never been okay with that kind of thing. Cause like, as I'm reading the book, which I think you tell such a magnificent story and such a real story. I mean, I got kids, I got a 24-year-old and a 22-year-old, and listening to your back and forth while reading, which felt like listening because I could sort of hear you having these conversations with your son, was so familiar, right? Like you have kids around that age, there's this universal push pull that goes on. And I think you captured that beautifully.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Isn't that kind of push pull, and knowing when to sort of not engage in the push and just realize just let that one go by, and then they'll pull you in close, And it's I had the luxury that you very rarely get with adult children, which is time.
Yeah.
That was my greatest luxury because I didn't have to constantly be reacting to all the things that are telling myself not to react. I would just wait it out, and just, it's not like here at home, I'm just like, hey, Sam, you want to go out and get sushi? Okay, see you later. And there, it was just a wonderful kind of, you try and sit my son down to have a chat, you're not going to get very far, but you get him moving and physical, eventually it all was pouring out. And yeah, it was a great opportunity to do that and to get to know each other. As the goal of the walk was really, when I was 17, I left home, and my relationship with my father essentially ended there. And that was it for the rest of his life, and I had no relationship with him in adulthood, and I didn't want that to be the case with my kids. And so it was an opportunity to sort of try and begin to transform our relationship from parent-child to parent-child that are, adults. And I didn't know how to do that because I didn't have any template for that. So I just thought, Camino was a powerful experience for me the first time, and it might be again. And I thought it might do him some good, as he was 19, so he was just sort of beginning to get out there into the world on his own. And sort of it gave me, I remember it gave me an internal stability when I first did it, and I thought he would benefit from that. And it turns out he seems to have.
Were you afraid at 58, because you were 58 when you did this second walk, that your body wouldn't allow you to do it?
I never once thought about anything about my body doing that until I turned 60 just a few months ago. And so when I was 58 and did the walk, no. Although near the end of the walk, I was like, I'm never doing this again.
Yeah.
But no, when I turned 60, I had some real, for the first time ever, a number really affected me. Whereas it didn't, 40, 50, I never blinked. And but recently it's sort of, I was like, wow, 60 is the beginning of being old. You're not a
I mean,
kid.
that's great. By the way, that's great that you think only 60 is the beginning of being old because, like, my husband's 55, I'm 53, and everything hurts. I mean, I'm active. I'm a big believer in walking. I mean, I love that the concept of walking to get your sun to open up because, in a way, I do believe that when we are physically exhausted and when we exert ourselves physically, we don't have the defenses that we have when we're seated. You can't because your body's working so hard. It can't also keep those walls up. So it like makes sense that they would come down and he would be really
I,
who he is, but everything hurts.
I think that's absolutely right. That's totally right. About the walking and physicality, just sort of, it's like
Yeah.
we're hamsters on that treadmill, doing that thing, and then
Yeah.
the physical activity just burns that off, and it's just you there, and it's
Yeah.
such a relief, isn't it? And so uh, that's what happened on the walk, day in and
Yeah.
day out. Yes, cumulatively, it began to wear my body down a bit. Yeah. Whereas my
How
son
much
was stronger as we was. The more walking we did, the stronger he got. Whereas
youth?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
He's a baby. How much weight did you guys lose or did you not?
We did. I think I probably lost. I don't know. I didn't measure, but you know, 8, 9 pounds. 10 pounds.
Amazing. It's worth it.
We were walking in the heat of August. So it was scorching hot out every day. So it was a bit. We were in a
Yeah.
sauna every day.
Oh my God. When you first said to Sam that you wanted him to walk with you, now I guess you told him about this his whole life, right? Like he knew the day was going to come that you were going to take him.
Well, he knew the day would come when I mean, come on, Sam. No, he'd never, I had talked about it a lot because it was such a seminal experience for me the first time, but I don't know that we were ever, destined to do it until we were, I mean, in the
Yeah.
minute he said yes, I literally went to the other room and bought the 2 tickets. And 2 days later, we were on the plane to Spain because I knew if he had time to think about it, he would change his mind.
Yeah, right. Of course. Well, there were moments, though it didn't seem like there were that many, that he was sort of like, I'm out, I'm done, I'm finished.
Well, at the beginning, particularly, he was, when he says to me, "Is there an airport in Pamplona?" It's not hard to read his mind.
Right, right. Yeah. And I love the stories that you told about the people along the way. And Roger, did you ever figure out why Roger was so taxi bound, what the
Taxi cab
significance was?
Roger, no, I never got to the bottom of him at all. But that's one of the things about the Camino. You meet all these incredible characters along the way. And it's like you form your own little pods because everybody's kind of going the same place. And so it's this ever-changing kind of morphing thing. But yeah, we're meeting the people from all over the world was a really interesting, wonderful
What
part of
happened
it.
with Alex and Morgan?
Well, it didn't end well. We find out months
Yeah.
later.
I had a feeling.
Because actually, Sam went to the wedding of the white people. He went down to their wedding in Costa Rica, and Alex and we were there, and he got the full story. It didn't end well. Alex
Yeah,
Morgan broke his heart.
obviously. That was clear.
Obviously, yeah, exactly.
That was a clear, I mean, I saw that.
The only one who didn't see that coming was Alex.
Correct, but I think the rest of it, and you sort of shifted the narrative once she broke the engagement and the honeymoon phase was over. It was clear that she wasn't really going to be in it forever.
But the Camino's
guy.
thing. It exposes people to themselves, and that's whatever you need to learn, you tend to learn.
Yeah. What did you learn about Sam that you didn't know?
I probably learned that he's okay.
Mm,
He's a very different guy than me. And I also learned to see him in a way that I didn't see him. We tend to project so much onto our kids and sort of through our filter, through whatever color lenses we're looking, that's what we see. And I learned a bit to take my glasses off, as it were, to continue the bad metaphor and see him for who he was, a separate kind of person who deals with things very differently than I do. Even though we
Yeah.
look alike and temperamentally we can be alike in certain ways, he's a very different guy. And to be able to see him, I think that was the big thing for both of us, to be able to see each other
Yeah.
And that we tend not to do that with family members a lot. So to be able to see him and let him, and then allowing him to see me, as opposed to being dad who knows all this stuff and is his way, or whatever role I play in his life, to sort of drop that and just be the guy walking next to him for so long, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, it's sometimes it takes a bit of courage or a decision to drop that persona of who we are to our kids particularly, and let them see who we are as vulnerable and exposed and not knowing that much.
I feel like they know. I feel like we may try to hide things, but I feel like at that age, by the time they're 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, they know who you are. And when they throw it back in your face, it can be a really jolting moment because you're
But
like,
when
wait, I thought I missed
Yeah, I
that.
agree with that completely. But when you can cop to the fact that they know, and that there's just a relief in that, and then they see that you're
Yeah.
not trying to be this dad thing anymore,
That's right.
they can then come closer to you because you're not trying to be something that they know you're not.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're just sort of in a way waiting for you to grow up in a certain way.
Yeah. I love how you are not judgmental. Even, well, okay, let me say, one of the actually best parts of the book is when you are sort of judgmental, or not exactly judgmental, sort of criticizing yourself or Sam or anybody like a normal person would. And then you have a moment of self reflection where you know that makes you kind of a dick and you don't want to be that way. So you're like sort of constantly working on yourself. But being sober for as long as you've been sober and living your life a certain way, and then we have Sam come along and he's still smoking cigarettes and he's doing this 500-mile trek, and he was quitting and then he wasn't. How did you keep it together as a dad with your boy, watching his behaviors, knowing that like he's got to live his own life and be his own man, but also like you're not happy he's smoking?
Look, I smoked for 10, 15 years. Uh,
Sure.
and I drank like a fish and almost ruined my life with alcohol. The only thing I constantly barrage my kids with is, the only thing that will derail you in life is alcohol and drugs. And
Hmm.
it did mine. Alcohol and drugs are a slippery slope, and for everyone, and everybody, young person has to navigate that for themselves. And I just try.
Yeah.
I'd rather him be talking to me about it, and as opposed to and or doing it in front of me, than going, I got to go make a phone call and run out and be smoking a cigarette. I mean,
Oh,
that's
for sure.
silly.
Yeah. No.
It's also, he's figuring it out, and you just try and be there for it. Because if they're not if communication, I guess, is the only thing. If you're communicating with about me about it, or with anyone about it, then it's better. Because I did all this stuff alone and ended up feeling terribly, terribly isolated and alone.
Yeah.
Had more trouble because I was alone and felt I had nowhere to turn. And I do not want that to happen. That's the thing you don't want to have happen.
I agree. And I actually thought you handled it like really well. I don't think I could do that. I think I would have a panic attack, but I also have issues around all that stuff. I've always had a fear of addiction and so I never drank because I was scared of it. So I'm
Well, the
so, yeah.
fear is a big thing. And so the
Yeah.
first reaction is, of course, fearful. And then when you're fearful, you want to clutch on and then you get to
Hold tight.
let it go. It's okay. And,
Yeah.
I certainly didn't have the answer. I mean, I made a mess of it when I was a kid. So who am I to tell somebody?
And also you turned out okay. So I think there's that. And while you are different from your son and he is different from you, your narrative does kind of give me the feeling that there are similarities. He reminds me of you the way you talk about him, also of himself. I think you really show a developed human who is not you, but there's certainly similarities in the way you tell the story. It leaves me thinking that you two have sort of a likeness.
Of
He's your
course.
son.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. And he has, my son has a great sort of emotional courage and is very perceptive. And so, yeah, but yes, of course, we're similar in many ways. And then but that's the trick of finding
Yeah.
out when are you really seeing the similarity, or are you putting
Right.
your own thing onto him that's different? And that's the trick of when you're doing which appropriately. But when are you not seeing him and just projecting your own crap onto him, when are you actually similar, and so you can speak to what he's going through?
Andrew, when he talks about his ex, and again, like really, the real question is, how did you know he was going to be cool with everything you talked about? Did you give him a manuscript long before you turned it into the editor? Like, how did that work? Because you do talk about his vulnerabilities, his heartbreak.
Well, we'll see. He hasn't read it. I gave it to him. I said, Sammy, you want to read this before it goes in? Yeah, yeah. And he flipped through it. And he also read the audiobook with me. So he said all his dialogue. He's seen all his dialogue. We read the audiobook. But he hasn't read it. So, I mean, and I hope in a certain way, they're just human emotions. There's nothing quote unquote personal in a certain way. It's just hopefully we're just talking about emotions that all of us have.
Yeah.
And a lot of the book, hopefully, sort of my own stumblingness as a parent, and he's sort of this bounce board for my, who am I to reveal his stuff? But except that, how do I say it? It's more about my struggles in a certain way than his, in a certain way. But yeah, the short answer is I don't know. We'll have to see if he's still talking to me once he finally does read it.
God. Oh no. I think he'll talk to you. I mean, it's funny. It's actually, again, it's like that universal parenting thing as I'm just reading about how he uses every towel in the room or spends hours in the bathroom or the timeline of the kids. Like it's a generational thing. And yeah, and I love how you just sort of pivot at one point and you're like, fine, meet me later. And then I'm thinking, how were you able to handle that? Like I would have lost my shit if my kid were walking alone and then we're meeting up and we're walking across Spain. It How did you even like deal with
Well,
that?
frustration. It's like, I'm not waiting for you anymore. Get out of bed. I can't take it anymore. I don't want to scream at you. I'm just leaving. you know, and and you know, it's one of those things. Like at the end, the journey is this 500-mile walk to Santiago, and then
Yeah.
there's the thing beyond Santiago. There's like a 3 days walk to the sea that so many people do, which I didn't feel compelled to do, and he wanted to go beyond to Finisterre. It's called, and so
Yeah.
that's really the guy. When I knew I sort of had a book in that sort of low hanging fruit of that metaphor of the child going beyond the parent, which is what we all want, right? We want
Of
our kid,
course.
the first one to go to college, the first one to be a doctor, whatever it is. For him to go beyond our walk to all the way to the sea was like, I loved that he wanted to do that, and I felt like my work, I had done my work that he wanted to keep going. Made me
Yeah.
feel really satisfied. And at the end, I took a taxi out to meet him at the end of the thing to see him striding up the hill, and to receive him and for him to allow me to receive him.
Yeah.
It was great. That was very meaningful to me.
I love that you have that philosophy of your kid should do better. I mean, I think that is the appropriate way of thinking that you want your kid to go beyond you in all ways. But as a Hollywood person or someone who's been in the limelight or sort of the focus of people's attention, there's never been that moment of competition for you. Like that's so healthy that you just want him to do better, do more.
Well, my dad had a great difficulty with me being successful when I was young, and
Yeah.
I worked on that a lot. So I didn't want that in my life. And them going beyond us is the appropriate evolutionary thing. That's what should be happening from apes on, that we evolve
That's right.
beyond to the next. Then to want someone not to, that you love, is kind of the selfishness of that is really disturbing.
Yeah, it's egregious, but the bait and switch of parenting is also egregious because we
Well,
have these babies and we love them and they're forever our babies, even though they're grown-ups, and we're supposed to shuttle them out there, right? And shuffle them off to go live their lives and do great things. And then
as
we're
long as
left.
they do it the way we think they should be doing it.
Well, yes, of course. They have to do it the way we know. But it's hard. There is a bittersweet something about watching these kids come of age and really turn into their own people, and then you like them as people, almost like a peer, even though they're never actually your peer because they're your child. But I don't know, there's something incredibly like nostalgic in the passage of time it just can be all at once devastating and beautiful.
Yeah, that's a good description. Devastating and beautiful simultaneously. I think that's very true. Because that is,
Yeah,
you want them to go flourish. And then they go and they're
please.
flourishing and you kind of go, wait.
Right,
Yeah,
right. Wait, I'm here. Hello.
yeah.
Yeah, no, but that's the role. That's why it's bait and switch, because that is you do it right, they leave. They have to.
If you do it right, they leave. Exactly.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. What
I mean,
did you learn about you?
what's that?
What did you learn about you this time around?
I was so afraid like I said, because my relationship with my dad ended, I was so afraid all my life that mine would end with my son and all my children when they got older. And I learned a bit that I could just, and that was an internal anxiety that that I was aware of, but I didn't realize how much it was influencing me. And so I think that calmed down a great deal. And I learned to just trust a little bit more and to just internally relax a bit with my kids and with myself in the role of parenting. That is a relief on a good day.
On a good day, right? Because the demons, they surface.
Yeah, I mean,
But I feel like you've put in the equity, like you've put in the work, and you've from like I feel
well,
like
you
when it
hope
comes
that's
to
the case. You hope that's the case, certainly, and you like to tell yourself that's the case, and then you always have to question your motives and what you're, you know, why you're doing things like that.
yeah, well, maybe you do. I'm not kidding. Of course. But Andrew, I feel like if you're the kind of dad, and you are, who is contemplative about his decisions and his motivations and his whys for what he does as a parent, then you're probably already doing a really decent job because you're thinking about it. Your dad, I'm not sure he was thinking about it.
Well, I don't even think he knew, come from a generation that he would even know to think about it. They're just reacting. That's the thing. You just want to not be reacting to things all the time. And my dad was also a terribly fearful guy who didn't know he was afraid, and
Oh,
so he masked his fear with anger, because anger feels better than fear. Because anger, at least you feel in control, whereas fear is just like, oh my God, I'm vulnerable. And no one wants to feel that, right? That's a 4-letter word. But so to at least acknowledge, to be able to see, that's what I learned the first time I walked the Camino all those years ago. Is I learned how fearful I was, and in learning that and having that realization, that sort of white light experience of realizing how much fear had dominated my life, you begin to be liberated from it. It doesn't, of course, obviously, as you know, go away instantly or
yeah.
altogether. It always keeps coming back, but it can never have the blind hold over you that it does once you become aware of it and can name it.
Yeah.
And so at least when I went to my dad and he was dying on his deathbed, and all I saw in his eyes was the fear, because he didn't have the strength to be angry anymore. And it broke my heart for him and for our relationship. That it had been fear that was between us the whole time, you know. And I
But you
just
showed,
didn't
yeah.
want that to be my life.
But you showed up. You showed up for your dad.
Well, that's
You were
the thing,
there.
you show up, I'm very glad I didn't. I did it selfishly. I did it for myself. I did it for me, and I did it so I'd be a better parent to my kids. And I did it, it just, I wanted to get rid of all the baggage and all the crap that had been there. So now although he's gone, I'm able to love my dad in a way I never did during life, and he's not still out there doing, he's gone. And I don't know, it was just a release that was wonderfully welcome.
Yeah, well, that's great. I mean, that's grief and ultimately a different kind of love. And I do believe we get to have a whole other relationship with people we loved and lost. And yeah, in a way, you get an oddly fuller kind of understanding of who they were when they're no longer here, because the in the moment emotion that might have stopped you from having some sort of clarity because of the anger, because of the stuff that is ongoing while someone's alive is gone. So there's almost
I
a
think
clearer picture in front of you.
that's very true, I think. And you're no longer dealing with behavior, you're just dealing with
Mhm.
the essence. And because you don't have to contend with the behavior anymore. So
Mhm.
just contend with the essence, which is ultimately always love, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's what you'd hope. What about your two younger kids? How are you gonna, where are you gonna try this again? How could you try this again?
Well, my daughter said, "Can we just go to Paris?"
Perfect. That's what, by the way, my daughter just says, can we just go to Paris? Like that's exactly right. I could see my husband and my son maybe do it, but not really. They'd have to have a guide. And we're still nervous. Like I'd be nervous that you guys just went from place to place, whether you had a place to stay or not.
Well, it's a pretty simple life out there. That's one of the beauties of it. It's so unbelievably simple. All you're doing is walking and getting food and finding a place to sleep. And neither of those two things are very difficult to do there. It's not like you're on the Appalachian Trail where your whole world is on your back and you've got to fend for yourself. And there's something wonderfully simple and profound about just removing everything else and you're just walking. And there's something about that is so connecting to the earth and to yourself that fear and anxiety dissipate very quickly.
That's so cool. When you got back, how long did you rest?
Well, I still am. It took my feet a good month to sort of settle down, but when you come back from things like that, it's always that's also bittersweet as well, because it's over. It was a time for it to be over. It's appropriate that it's over, but you wish it wasn't, but you can't do it again. That was a moment and that was a time. And so it's, and it's not something you can really even share with people and tell them about, because it's just such an internal experience, like any good journey is, but so when you do those kind of things with someone, you always have that. You just kind of look at each other and you just sort of have that, you mentioned, Hales mentioned something about, remember Roger when he did that? And I just look, oh yeah, and it's a very private kind of wonderful touchstone.
How different was it this time around because of the devices that you were able to track Sam, or he could track you, or if you didn't see him, you could call him? Like, there was an added level of security, or did that detract from the experience at all?
Yeah, I mean, the first time I did it, if I wanted to make a call, I had to find a pay phone that was working and then make a collect call the way we used to. Remember, could I reverse the charges, please? Find an operator, all that. What's interesting is, of course, the devices that make our life simpler, but they also, as everyone talks about, make it much more fractured and keep us away from ourselves, right? So, because we're always defaulting away from any kind of uncomfortability or silence to phones. But as we walked, and as the hamster wheel starts to sort of slow, we found the phones and the need to use them receding, and so they sort of fell into a more appropriate place of use. And suddenly you realize, I'm going to check my phone all day. Actually, let me check. And so, because you don't need to be changing how you feel or looking for a quick hit of something, or did something happen? Did I get something? Did somebody say something good? Or, any of that nonsense that we all have grown dependent on. So there was something wonderful about that sort of liberation from all that stuff. And it wasn't like we're going to put our phones down, we're going to do this, that, because that wouldn't have happened. And again, any kind of resistance against that was silly. And it just took care of itself.
Yeah, you could sort of see that as you're reading through, kind of the dependence and the talk about the X dissipated, or the Instagram comments dissipated. And I could read the evolution, like I could feel the evolution of the walk taking hold, rather than the two of you taking hold of the walk. Do you know what I mean? Like,
that's exactly right. That's exactly well put. Yeah, because you do, it asserts itself into and becomes the thing. At the beginning, you're walking, and then by the end, it's just the Camino's happening to you. That's exactly
yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
it's pretty magical. I will never do it, but it's a kind of thing that I would want to do. Like, I have zero aspirations of running a marathon, but a trek across the country, that appeals to me, because I have the constitution to walk for days, to run for none, but I could walk slowly everywhere indefinitely. Like, I feel that, like, that's how I'm wired. So, but I think you're brave. I think you guys were brave.
Oh, I don't know that it requires it. The only thing, you just have to go. People ask me about it, and I just say, just go. There's nothing you need or nothing you need to do. You just need a good pair of walking shoes, and you just go. If you're not in, you're going to towns along the way. Yeah, everything's fun. It's always fear that stops us. It's always fear.
I know, but fear is a really
Fear is a powerful thing.
annoying detraction from, the things that you want to do. What do you think you've done to really get it out of your way to be able to do all the things that you've done? Because if you look at your career, if you look at all of it, it feels like you're constantly working on yourself. Andrew, you're 60 years old, and at 58, you chose to do this incredibly difficult walk across Spain. And I know you're going to be, it's not that difficult, but it is. It's 4 or 5 weeks of walking every day in extreme heat with limited sort of comforts that you're used to. So what do you think it is that you've done all this time that keeps you motivated to learn and do and grow more?
Well, what else would we do?
I don't know. Some people don't do. Some people are.
Well, I implode if I'm not sort of moving forward. I just and I don't like that feeling. And I have great experience with the travel is transformative. And I do find the world has been my university, to myself and to my emotional life. And my emotional life is, and other people's emotional lives are of interest to me. I'm fascinated
Mhm.
by that, and
Mhm.
I'm curious about that. And uh, doing, and I find fear again back that is the main culprit, and it's always going to seep in and want me to not do anything and to atrophy me. So I'm doing things like walking the Camino or just going traveling, particularly, is an easy way to do it. It pushes fear away and allows all the stuff to come out. And so in some ways, I suppose being so fearful and fear-based is a great liberation for me, because it's forced me to push through it, to do things. Otherwise, I would just be swallowed up by it, and I just don't want that in my life.
What about writing? At what point did you realize that you were a writer?
When I was traveling, when I was 15 years old, I walked on stage as the Artful Dodger, and in high school play, and I found myself. I located myself. I was like, there I am. And when I started acting, it was there I was. And then I was in the field of wheat in the Camino, and that notion of fear was revealed to me, and I went, there I am. And I started writing. I remember exactly where I was. I was in Saigon. I was on a solo trip to Saigon, and this kid came up to me on a scooter as I was walking down the street and said, hop on, I'll give you a ride. And I'm like, leave me alone, leave me alone. And he's like, no, I'll give you a ride. Come on, hop on. I'm leave me alone. Anyway, he wouldn't leave me alone. I hopped on his scooter, and he showed me around Saigon for the day, to like where his mother tended the public garden, where his father had been arrested, all this kind of crazy stuff. And when he dropped me back at my hotel that night, I gave him $5. He demanded 10. I gave him 10. And I went up to my room and I wrote down what happened. I didn't know what to do. I was buzzing in my room. I was so buzzy, I didn't know what to do. And so I just grabbed a piece of paper and I wrote down what happened with us that day. And the minute I finished that, I felt exactly like I did when I was 15 years old as the Artful Dodger. I just went, oh my God, there I am. That just felt like me doing that. And so I started doing that. And I started writing, and that's how I became a travel writer, because that's where it first located. And then the writing expanded into other kinds of writing. But I just felt like me when I did it. And so I went toward that. I'm a terrible businessman, but things that make me feel that way, I go toward. And so, yeah, that's why I end up going from being a movie actor to a travel writer. I mean, any accountant will tell you that's a bad career move, so, but that's what made me feel, jazzed and like myself. And so that's all I ever wanted, was to feel like myself, so, so I just followed those things.
Arguably, how bad a decision is that when the books are New York Times bestsellers?
Well, when it works out, it's great, isn't it?
Yeah, I
Well,
mean, yeah.
that's one of the, I don't particularly, I was talking to someone about this the other day. I don't really, one of the freedoms and blessings of being 60 is you don't really care a lot anymore about certain things. The only reason I want to be successful in things is because it's going to allow me, my ego
Yeah.
will like it. That's pleasant for 5 minutes. But then if it's successful, it's going to allow me to do the next thing I want to do more easily, and so good. I want it to be successful so that they'll let me do it again without struggling as hard to sell it. But the actual doing of the things, I've come to realize finally, is of course the great reward. And I do believe that now, sitting alone and writing the thing is deeply satisfying, even when it's struggling, going poorly or whatever, or acting in a thing and
That's
now,
the question. Yeah.
just the doing of it is where the reward is. And
Yeah.
it's nice when it's great when it's successful, because it just means I gonna get to do it again.
Do you have a writing process like morning pages every day to keep sort of that muscle going, or your creative spirit awake, like that artist's way mentality of making sure you keep things light and fun and playful because you're an artist?
Well, I would never call myself an artist, and I didn't. I'm always a bit baffled by things like the artist way. The two, I mean, I think they're great. And I know people that have great experience with it. It's just not for me. But I do write best in the morning when my brain is sort of clearer. By the end of the evening, my brain is mush. So,
Everyone's, yeah.
yeah. But and I did try and do morning pages for a while. I remember the article years ago when it was a big buzz, and There's something about the dutifulness of it that I didn't respond to. The one thing I did find interesting about the artist, so I remember there was one week when you weren't supposed to read anything, and I found that incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
You realize I'm constantly reading signs, like I'm reading behind you. I'm reading Jenny Hutt right behind you, and I'm
Yeah.
reading probably multiple times. And what that does to your brain to actively not do that and create space. And I did think that going on an artist date for yourself. I'd always done that, like going to a museum by yourself is a really important thing to do. And when I
That's
was a young
almost,
kid, I always went to the movies by myself. I loved going by myself.
but that wasn't what made you want to be an actor, was the experience of being on the stage.
Yeah, the experience of being on stage was yes, that made me want to be an actor. Yeah,
Right. But going to movies by yourself was just a thing that you like to do.
I did, but I also learned a great deal about movie stars. Movie stars are different than actors, and watching movie stars and how they sort of draw at the light and draw people to them.
Explain. Explain.
I can't explain. It's just something about it. You just see somebody and you go, whoa, and you just go to them, right? And so there's something about that unconsciously I would just osmosis go, I get that. I want what's happening there. And I didn't even know I was doing that. But when that's why I was kicked out of college. I used to go back in New York in the early 80s,
Yeah.
these revival houses, and I used to go to them every Tuesday and Thursday. There'd be that's when they'd change over in the revival house. And I used to go sit every afternoon, Tuesdays and Thursdays, and watch double features of Marlon Brando movies. And they were really programmed really well. There'd be On the Waterfront with A Streetcar Named Desire, and then there'd be Montgomery Clift movies on Thursday and Jimmy Stewart movies on Monday, and you'd go, I would plan my week around those things. And I loved that. It was a real education for me. Those things are long gone.
So when you became an actor and a movie star, how did that sit with you?
What do you mean?
Because they're two different things, based on what you were just saying.
Well, yeah, they are. They are. One can be an actor can be a movie star, and a movie star can be an actor, but they don't have to be. Movie stars don't have to be. Like Humphrey Bogart was never a great actor, but he's a fantastic movie star.
Right.
And you could say that about many contemporary people as well. But I don't know that I ever became a star like that. I was successful and of a moment.
Oh, come on. I mean, Andrew, please, I remember I went to all of those movies were what we watched. You're my generation. You were one of my movie stars. You and Rob Lowe. And I mean, that was the Brat Pack to me, more like those were the people.
There was a moment when that was it. Yeah.
It was a real moment. Yeah.
I didn't realize that at the time, but it certainly was. It's interesting that I've come to really see that that was the moment when youth cinema took over popular culture and never released its grip. Before that, movies were not for or about young people. Movies were for grown-ups. And it was those movies that made the transition to where we still are, which is in an adolescent emotional entertainment. All the Marvel movies and all these, they're all adolescent, and now we just take it for granted. Oh, movies are for young people, but it wasn't the way back then. And that changed all that. Those John Hughes movies and those Brat Pack movies changed the way entertainment was made in Hollywood. And we're still feeling the repercussions of that.
It's fun to do them. I know you wrote a book about being in the Brat Pack years ago, but when you look back on it now, did you feel any of it in the moment while you were shooting? Any of it sort of that, like, what a cool crowd to be in, just from like the high school perspective, right? Like you were part of the cool kids.
I didn't feel that at the moment. No, I didn't. No, I was just trying to get the next job. I was just an insecure kid trying to get the next job.
And you were so good. And maybe that's part of it. Maybe like your vulnerability that came across on screen because you were acting, maybe some of that was really the who that you are.
Well, what I had when I look back at some of those movies, you can say whatever you want about the acting. What I had, which I talked about in that Brat book, was I had that moment of, I was just blossoming. Yeah. And there's no more exciting moment in life or more attractive moment than when their life is a blank slate to be written upon and they're just blossoming. You see with James Dean in East of Eden all the way back to them, and and all the way up through What's Eating Gilbert Grape, and you see with Leonardo DiCaprio in his first movie, you just see that, yes, the acting is whatever it is, but there's the moment of discovery and blossoming that's just so attractive. and
Yeah.
it can't be denied. And it's like a sunrise, it's so bright and brilliant. And it's like, oh my, and the sense of possibility is can, really contagious, and you want to be around it. And
Hmm.
that's what I had and what we had in that instant, you know.
I think that's what we get in Walking with Sam, which is, of course, your newest book, A Father, a Son, and 500 Miles Across Spain. I think we get that from Sam. I think that
He has that.
by the right by the end, you sort of feel he's coming into his own, and wherever he lands, he's going to be just fine.
Yeah, it's always hard for parents to sort of trust that in a way, but yeah, he does have that. I see it, and you just have to stay out of the way of it because a lot of people want to devour that because they're because of whatever they're afraid of
Hmm.
it or they're envious of it, and it's frail and it has to be sort of protected. That's what protected in a certain way, and it's fleeting. That moment
Yeah.
and that blossom. Even a flower
Yeah.
blossom is amazing, and then week later it's gone. But it's a special thing, and that it shouldn't be interfered with.
Is he acting? Because you talked a little bit about that too. Like,
Yeah,
where is
he's
he
on
now?
a show called he did a show called Dead to Me on Netflix for
Oh,
summer.
I love. Yeah, I watched. I think
Yeah,
the first season of that. I didn't
he's
even realize he was in it.
the oldest son, yeah, and he just did a television pilot. Let's see if it gets picked up. And he was just studying up in RADA at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts in London. So
Oh,
he's he's on doing his thing.
the boy who couldn't do school went to school. I love that.
Yeah, I did too. I mean, yeah, I school's a funny thing. If you fit the square peg in the
Oh
square,
yeah,
great. If you don't, there's no place for you. I'm still recovering from how they told me I was stupid in school. It's amazing.
yeah.
I'll always be sort of anti-academia because I resent them so much for what they said. And then I watched them do it to my son, and I couldn't protect him, and that kills me.
Well, you have that moment too, and I think that's beautiful. I think as parents, we have to have those moments of reckoning where we realize where we screw up because we all screw up. Like you can't not screw up if you're raising kids.
Yeah.
Own it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you. The book is really magnificent. It's out now, Walking with Sam, A Father, a Son, and 500 Miles Across Spain. Order it. You will love it. It's beautifully written, and the story is it's going to make you want to go walk and travel and do. Thank you for being on my podcast. You're at Andrew McCarthy on Instagram. That's your main social media.
I'm on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. Yeah.
Okay, all of them. And yeah, thank you for being on my podcast.
Oh, thank you. It's always fun to see you.
All right. I'm at Just Jenny Hutt on Instagram, at Jenny Hutt on TikTok and Twitter. And you can email justjennypod@gmail.com with any questions or comments. And I'll talk to you later.